episode of Hey Mama. We talk all things motherhood and female empowerment. I'm joined here by Leonie today from the Parenthood Podcast. I was fortunate enough to be a guest on Leonie's podcast last week, so I'm super excited to have Leonie on here because I thought her story was equally as important. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, you're also a property developer in Melbourne, and you have 2 toddler boys. Now you have this Parenthood podcast. It's 50 episodes in, am I right?
Yeah, 40, a bit over 40 now. So
okay,
yeah.
Amazing. So what made you decide to take on the Parenthood podcast as well as already being so busy yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question, particularly when I had my second baby at 6 weeks and then decided to start the podcast then. That's a really good idea of mine.
Such a great idea. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what else are you going to do with my time? So, yeah, look, I love to have a full cup, and sometimes that's probably my biggest downfall as well. I put a lot of pressure on myself and have huge expectations, and sometimes they're not overly realistic. And then, I end up in burnout state. So that's something I'm really, really mindful of. But the reason why I started the podcast was because I was actually suffering with both pregnancies. I had prenatal depression and then had postnatal as well. And I think at the time I didn't even realize it was depression, but I just knew something just wasn't right. I wasn't myself. I wasn't looking forward to the bubs. All the feels that you're meant to get, I felt as though I wasn't getting them. So I was looking for a resource that I could listen to that, was sort of someone talking from the perspective that I was sitting in. I wanted to hear the challenges about parenthood, just not all the fancy stuff you see on Instagram with the fabulous mums, baby on the hip, like how fabulous, I've got my little accessory sidekick now. I'm like, that's not what I'm feeling. I want to hear the real stuff. And so there are some fabulous podcasts out there for mums. But one thing I found was I wanted to hear stories, and I'm a bit of a storyteller. So where I was looking a lot at other podcasts that were like, this is a nutrition expert jumping on, or, a fitness expert, and this is what you should do, from those perspectives. And I think that's fantastic. I guess I was looking for, those really dark secrets, what's happening behind closed doors to normalize what I was feeling. So I decided to create the podcast.
Yeah, I love that so much. I absolutely love that so much because it's real people, and even if but it's also professionals being real, not being the facade. And like we talked about on your podcast last week, the pressure that you put on yourself to upkeep that facade. So would you say that your anxiety or post or prenatal depression started when you were pregnant?
I'd say
is that
so.
What you mean? Is that what you're saying? That you weren't looking forward to all those things?
Yeah, that's right. And look, to be fair, I think I've always had an underlying issue with anxiety my whole life, which has probably gone undiagnosed. A bit of background on me. My parents, essentially immigrants. My mum was born in Australia. She's of Greek heritage, and they left when she was 5 years old and lived in Greece from then on. So when she came back to Australia, it was kind of like she was new to the country, even though she was born here. My dad's Nigerian, and he came from a village in Africa and basically had next to nothing. So, and my mum came from that working class Greek background. They met in Greece, 2 people who didn't have much and really had big dreams. And so I think for them, that work ethic in me certainly stems from them. And I think sometimes the anxiety I feel is because I grew up in an environment where they were working ruthlessly to try and, build something. They had next to nothing. I mean, my dad would say in the village in Africa, they were able to have rice once a week, and that was known as a bit of a luxury in his sort of hut, essentially. So, we're talking extremes here from where we're sitting today in, our nice homes in Australia.
Yeah.
So I think that's why my drive is, pretty next level, because I think I've come from that background and hearing a lot of stories of, extreme poverty, really. And my parents have been able to build a property development business from the ground up for the last 30 years. But there was a lot of work involved, obviously, to get there. So I certainly, I think that's where the drive comes from. And sometimes I think that's where my anxiety stems from as well, because, my childhood was a good childhood, but certainly they were just very work focused.
Yeah, and very, like, they would be struggling all the time to build. And then, you feel that too as a child, even though, parents and even myself, I'm probably guilty of it with having 2 kids myself and building a business. You try to not worry them, or you try to keep them out of it, but they pick up on that sort of stuff, don't they? You pick up on every little action that's monkey see, monkey do. And so unintentionally, and I know my elder, she picks up on my anxiety, my vibe, and she picks up those traits as well. So, yes. Tell me a little bit about even you had the anxiety, but when you were suffering with the prenatal depression, so you didn't know back then, and when did you start to realize? What were the signs?
For a bit of context, we were looking to fall pregnant within about a year, and I thought, you know what, I'm about a year off from even really, being ready for the bubs. So I think I'll get off the pill now, and I've been on the pill for 8 years. So my body's probably going to need 6 months to recalibrate and all of that. The pregnancy actually happened quite quickly, to the point where we had a wedding booked in Greece. We'd gone over, we'd paid deposits and everything. And then I came back to Australia, found out I was pregnant. So my child was actually at my wedding. But the point is, and what a blessing, but at the same time, Misorganised, type A over here, who likes things structured and, all of that, it threw me for a loop, and I felt extremely grateful. However, I felt caught off guard, and I thought that's all it was. I guess I didn't really think it was depression per se, but it started off with me just being a bit overwhelmed by the whole idea of being pregnant, and then it started turning into more changes in my mood, being really flat, crying but not being able to explain why. And I'm not a crier, so I'd lie in bed sometimes, tears are streaming out of my eyes. My husband Jules is like, well, what's wrong? And I was just like, I don't know. I'm just terrified. I'm so terrified of having a baby. I'm so terrified of my life changing. I like to know what's going to happen next, and I can't foresee how this is going to even work. And I'm so grateful yet, and then I'm guilty for not, for being sad, because I should be grateful. And so many people, some people have really, long struggles in trying to fall pregnant. So, and then there was that negative chat. Oh, who do you think you are, Leonie? Then look, why are you upset? You should be singing off the rooftops, and here you are having a little cry over absolutely nothing. So I've got that harsh critic in me as well. So it was really compounded, and to the point where, I literally felt in a haze my whole pregnancy. It was, and that's when, only coming out of that did I realize, oh my God, that's what that was. For me, it was prenatal depression.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of us mums would just think, oh, that's hormones. And there's got to be, it's just hormones. It's like you've obviously got like a big injection of the hormones, and it's taking over you and all that kind of thing. Because I think about that too, and I think about how I used to lie in bed crying and stuff. But I had a lot of stress as well. Like you have a lot of stress going on while the pregnancy, and you do worry a lot. And so when you had your first bub, you had then you had postnatal depression. And how would you describe the postnatal depression?
Yeah, for me, it was high anxiety and also anger. So that's how it presented. I was furious. Like if anything, anyone said anything, and I had 1 or 2 Barneys with my family where they're like, whoa, just chill. And then after the fact, I went, oh my gosh, that's what it was. It was unreasonable, irrational anger. And also me wanting to control every facet of, this child's life made me, and I couldn't control the sleep, and I couldn't control this, and everything was annoying, and I couldn't breastfeed properly. And now I'm angry. And so I'm not sitting there, that didn't ebb and flow. And I guess to your point, how do you know if it's kind of hormones and just general life changes versus an actual depression? And I think for me, it was a consistent state of mind. And so I guess for those listening, if you're feeling like you're having that consistent waking up in the morning and being like, I don't care for today. I can't be starved. And it's funny because we spoke at the start about my drive, and everything has to be, 100%, and I really push myself. So to go from that extreme to, I don't even know if I want to get up, like what difference does it make? I'm over it. Like that's where, and it was consistently like that. That's when you can start seeing the signs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. From going from that extreme to being like, I get up and I go and I do this and I do that and I achieve goals and this, that, and the other, to then going, I don't really feel like getting up, or you feel sad to get up.
Yes.
Yeah. And how did the baby, how did your firstborn react to that? Would you say that they were an easy baby? Would you say that they're a hard baby? Like, how did this all transpire?
So I like to think that I am good at hiding my feelings, and to the point where like I like to think that.
And I'm laughing because it's like looking in a mirror right now.
Yeah, is it? Yeah. And look, I grew up in an environment where, as I said, my parents were pretty stressed a lot of the time, really. And a lot of it was financial stress. And I'm the eldest of three, so I didn't want to put extra burden on them. So my own problems, I kept very quiet to myself. And I always just plastered a smile on my face. And I was the peacemaker in the house. How can I make mum's life easier, dad's life easier? How can I, and so it was never really about me.
Yeah, you took that on.
I took that on. And so you become so good at what you're used to in your default setting. So even down the track, I mean, having the prenatal and postnatal, most people outside of my family would have had no idea. Like, I can plaster the smile on, get to work, get shit done, and then, come home and then fall to pieces again. But I'm very good at that. So I thought that I was potentially hiding it from my child too, in the way that, like, I didn't like yell. I was always just really mindful of how I was acting around the child. But I think implicitly, obviously, the baby is going to feel your vibe, right? So
definitely.
For me, both children I ended up in sleep school with, because they just didn't sleep great. I wouldn't say they were the worst sleepers, but it just almost like that erratic up and down, which, maybe it was just the baby, or maybe it also was a little bit of my stuff kind of
coming through. Yeah.
And for me, look, sleep school was the best outcome for someone like myself. I wanted structure, I wanted routine, and I wanted someone to tell me how to do it so I could get an A+ in sleeping and move on with my life, Like, I'm that type of person. So that worked, right? And they taught me how to do it, and then I followed the routine, and that was great. But all in all, my children, I was very fortunate in that they didn't cry a lot. They didn't sort of have colic or, other things that people face. It was the sleep was the biggest thing.
Oh yeah, and that's what I'm asking that from my point of view as well, because of what I went through. And the more and more I reflect, and the more and more I talked and have these real conversations with mums and what we've been through, you do realize that, like your stress levels are high, then their stress levels are going to be high as well. And then, in my instance, I was blaming the baby. But now when I think about those times, I was like, no. There was some stuff going on in my head and my heart that she was picking up, that she was terrified to be with anyone else, because she felt like, oh, I'm not going to go away from mum because this is just too, I don't know, too, scary or unusual or whatever. I'm just going to stay in this state. Yeah. So it's I like to ask those sort of questions about the sleep and also how it affects the baby's behavior and attitude and all that kind of thing. So then, do you think with the second one, because you did say you had it worse with the second one, is that because you kind of pre-anticipated what's to come?
Yeah, look, I thought, okay, I've got this second time around. God, like, this will be easy. And even the birth, I remember you saying your birth for the second time around was quite quick, very quick actually, but my one was quite quick too. I think it wasn't, it was, I say it was worse, but it was probably just different in the way that the same things that would challenge me as a first time mum, I didn't have that, but I was more angry at myself for feeling down. I was like, come on, Leonie, get on with it. You've already had, you know what to expect. Why are you still not feeling 100%? So it's probably more the second time around was more the inner critic coming to play and being like, why are you so angry for? Like, just get over it, move on, be happy. You've got a healthy baby. What the hell is wrong with you? So it's all, I think that stuff came into play. Whereas the first time around, it was, I'm scared, I'm terrified. I don't even want to leave the house. I'm scared. Like, how am I even going to put them in the pram? How am I going to do? It's just too hard. I just want to be in a dark room with my child and just, that's it. So it was more the anxiety and being terrified versus the second time round just being angry at myself, I think, a lot of the time as well.
And because you said you put a lot of pressure on yourself to not burden your family, did you ever have a conversation with your mom and say, hey, is this normal? Or did you have a conversation with anyone and say, hey, or did you feel like you couldn't because you were being so hard on yourself going, you shouldn't feel this way and you shouldn't and get on with it? Did you feel like you couldn't open up to somebody?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I don't think I ever, raised it with anyone as an issue, or as to receive any guidance. To be fair, when I was in it, I probably didn't even want to own that I was in it. I was like, whatever, get on with it, get the job done. I was very lucky. I had a lot of family support from my parents live locally. So I was extremely lucky in that respect. I think the only way they would have noticed it is me being more short, sharp, angry with them. But did I sit down and say, Mum, I'm feeling really off, is this normal? I didn't. And I think this is where I was really looking for conversations like the ones we're having now around okay, well, what are other people experiencing? And give me the real stuff. Don't tell me, yes, we're all grateful. Yes, our babies are beautiful. Yes, it is an absolute blessing if you have a healthy, beautiful baby, 100%. But it doesn't change the fact that your life is spun on its head. It doesn't change the fact that you may experience mental health issues around that you can't even really explain. And and so we need to talk about this more. And so that's where, as I said, podcasts like ours, I really find a really good resource.
Oh, and I think that they're becoming more and more popular, and because they're so powerful. Because I think the last generation, and I wanted to bring up the conversation with your mum, is whether you did have a conversation with anyone, because I don't know about you, but I felt like I couldn't. You talk about the big brave smile that you put on every day, and even in terms of breastfeeding, the first one I had problems from, and she ended up on formula from 3 months or something, and I couldn't talk to anybody about it because I felt like the failure. And my mum had breastfed 3 babies, not a problem, blah blah blah. And so you feel like you can't sit there and open up because then you get judged. My first mother's group, it was judgment, and I actually stopped going because that's not why I'm here.
Yeah. So it was one upping each other, or what was the story?
Definitely. Yeah. I feel as though back then, because I was quite young, back then it was a one-upper. But I think now having these open conversations, whether it's on podcasts and just listening so you can go, oh, I'm not involved, but I can relate, or sitting around, we've got a Mad Mums group. So we sit around and we talk about our, the vibe is, our kids are wonderful at this, that. We're like, oh, God, does little Jimmy do this? Or, I'm having trouble with this. Can you relate? And it's just a non-judgmental space.
I love that. It's so important. And I just think, as you said, thank goodness maybe the culture around this is really changing. And we're trying to spearhead that change as well with podcasts like ours. But I just think you need that. Otherwise you do feel very isolated, and motherhood is quite isolating, and often you and the barbs, and that's where
early on so isolating.
Yes, so isolating. And I found as well, I didn't have time to jump on these Facebook groups and try to connect that way. For me, maybe it's my personality, but it was so much easier just to whack in headphones, be standing around doing a million things with my hands and be listening.
Yes. 100%. And I guess that's why I started this as well, because I like to do food prep and put my headphones in and listen or watch something and multitask. And it's kind of like me time. But at the same time, you're providing for your family. You're still doing something for your family, or you're still working.
Yes.
Right? So the other question is, did it affect your relationship when you were going through this? Your relationship with your partner?
Yeah, so I think I was pretty fortunate in that Jules, my husband, is I think he's got a pretty good level of compassion and empathy. So if anything, as I said, I'm pretty good at being ice queen. So when I'm being ice queen and dragon mum and just kind of in my zone and trying to do 1,000 things that, in the 1 minute that I've got, if anything, that probably puts him off more, and he kind of just tries to stay out of my way. But as soon as I show a little bit of vulnerability, it's like he's like, oh, there she is. I'm melting now. And so at the time, yes, I was snappy, but the crying obviously showed an element of vulnerability there. So if anything, he stepped into that role of carer, or at least, you know, just being that supportive person for me, which was very fortunate to have. But having said that, the first time around for my first pregnancy, when I experienced the prenatal for the very first time, we didn't know what it was. I was freaking out. He was freaking out because he didn't know how to help me. He didn't understand what happened to his high energy, you know, love to be social partner. Like all of a sudden I was just not wanting to get out of bed. So we actually saw, I was already seeing a therapist. I've always seen one on and off for basically my whole life. But at the time I was seeing one anyway. And the therapist actually said, why don't you bring Jules along with you to our session? So that was quite eye-opening, because it was the first time. And I remember I was sitting there in the room and I was kind of a bit glazed over, and I was a bit like, this is so random that like Jules is sitting on the couch next to me in my space with my therapist, like what? But then I was in that sort of haze as well. And then so the therapist was asking Jules, like, so how's life been for you? You know, let's talk about you for a second. And he started off saying, look, I just don't know how to support Leonie. And then he kind of broke down. And at that minute, I remember looking at him, and it was the first time he's actually showed a level of vulnerability as well, because he's trying to be so strong for me. And then all of a sudden someone's actually turned to him and said, how are you going? And he just said, I don't know what to do. I thought this was going to be a joyous occasion. What the hell is going on here? You know, and I remember I was in such a zone that, like, if he broke down now with the state that I'm in, back to normal, or back to my usual state, I would feel so like, you know, like heartbroken that, you know, we're in this position. But at the time, I remember just looking at him and being like, oh, that's so annoying. Like, why? like get a grip, mate. Like, as in, I was just, you know, no compassion. And I'm so empathetic, no compassion, nothing. I was like, you have no idea what I'm going through. And I was just angry mixed with hazy, mixed with, I didn't even want to be here. I just want to go home and watch Netflix. Like, you know, and so that's what I mean by the difference between, I guess, a little bit of hormonal, you know, implications.
To like disassociation, like that is actually labeled as disassociation, where you want to like numb your life and your mind and your heart, basically, of this isn't my reality, I want to forget about it.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So look, after that session, she provided some tips. I can't even remember what they were now. But one of them, which was really helpful, was I'm a bit of a foodie, and I do love being social. I didn't really want to catch up with people necessarily at the time, but she said, how about try and do every Friday, just go somewhere together, whether that's the local Thai place down the road. Let's try and get Leonie out a bit more. And so we made a commitment to do that. And I remember often I'd sit there in the restaurant, and initially I'm a bit disgruntled. I don't even want to be here, like, annoying. Can't we just get Uber Eats, you know? And then I'm sitting there, and after maybe 20 minutes, you know, I started to sort of simmer, and I'm like, okay, actually this is good. You know, I needed this. So, you know, little things like that, just little stepping stones that we'd have just to try and get things back on track for us was really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, sometimes we have to do the things that we don't want to do to actually realize, oh, this is good for me. It's actually what I needed.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when did you dive back into property management?
So well, funnily enough, so as I mentioned to you, the property development stuff, so we build houses in Melbourne. My parents have sort of done that for most
so it came from them.
So it came from them. I never wanted to be part of the family business. It was never an interest of mine. I wasn't interested in property. So I went off and did consulting for a little while and things like that. And then eventually, I don't know, 6 years ago, I was living in Sydney. I came back to Melbourne, and in Sydney, I actually got a job with a property company, but doing more their business strategy, sort of more businessy aspect of things. So when I came back, I was looking for work, and then eventually my parents said, well, why don't you just do what you were doing for them? You don't have to go on the construction sites and stuff, but just essentially be like the in-house consultant for us. And I thought, I'll give it a year or so, and then I'll move on with my life. But then I haven't. Obviously, 6 years later, I'm still very much involved in the family business. So to your point, I mean, you would know as well, when you've got a business and it's not my business, but I guess I feel as though it's like my fourth sister because it's been around our whole life.
Exactly. It still
like
feels
like, different sort of association. So, and so for that reason, even when I did have the bubs, and I did mention this to you in our interview, I felt like I couldn't let go of the work piece. And probably from an identity perspective, I was like, I just want to like be in touch with what's going on at work, because at least I know that stuff, and this baby stuff is really hard. And, so it was always there, and I'd always sort of check in, honestly, most days, but sometimes it was just to delete emails that were not relevant to me, but just something so I felt like myself again. And then, I don't know, I think you were saying a similar thing as well with
definitely it was a distraction as well from the hard stuff that you're actually doing at home, and to feel like a piece of you or identity that you were before. And even when you look at it, reflecting, you think, wow, why didn't I just sit there and enjoy the baby and enjoy the snuggles and stuff, because it doesn't last long. But at the same time, when you're in it, you're like, oh, but this is hard. This is hard to sit in pain. That's what it is, isn't it? Because we all do it on some level, whether we're parents or not. If something is painful and it's bringing it up for us, we would go and distract ourselves with something else. That's when you do the most studying, I found. When I went through a divorce, I went straight into personal training and did all my certificates and oh, this is good. This distracts me from pain. I don't have to feel that over there, or put that aside.
Absolutely.
Moving with emotions. So do you think that still going into the property, diving into the business still while you were raising, the babies quite young, do you think that was a good thing or a bad thing for your anxiety and depression?
Yeah, look, I think with the way I operate in my mind, the chaos that exists in there, I needed that. And I think everyone's different. I actually get more anxious if I'm sitting around doing, I say doing nothing, but sometimes even doing nothing. Like for me to sit down, like I need to do something. I don't know, maybe that's a mum thing now. Like mums find it very difficult, right? To just sit there and look at the dirty dishes and look at the washing, and that's in the
you feel guilty, you feel shame, like bad mum.
Exactly. So I think even just touching base every now and then with that, with work, even it kind of kept me sane. And it kind of made me feel each day as though I was accomplishing something, which now as I say that out loud, it sounds ridiculous, because I was looking after a newborn, and that is like the biggest accomplishment in the world.
Right? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I was saying before. Like, why didn't we just sit in this? We're actually, raising a human being. Why do mums do this to ourselves? Why do we do that to ourselves? Like, we're insignificant because we're at home with a baby. That one I'm really passionate about.
Like, what else really is more important? Like, is that spreadsheet that you're trying to bloody, work through, is that as important as, doing the nappies and the changing and the cuddles and the, like living your life? Like,
it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know where we got this conditioning from, because, I remember even feeling guilty when Pete came home from work one day and I'm lying on the lounge with my boobs out and I'd just been, and, the child's asleep. And and I'm just sitting there watching Housewives of Beverly Hills or something. And I'm like, you kind of feel like, maybe I should pretend I'm doing something. Please, I'm doing something.
This is my job now. Like,
this is my job now. But I don't even think it's them.
I know.
It's us that do it to ourselves.
Yes.
Big
time. And so, I mean, look at me, I even started a bloody podcast when I was sitting. So I was listening to so my sister has a podcast production agency, and she has this course around how to start your own podcast. So I was sitting there with my earphones in, breastfeeding, listening to like module 1, how to start your own podcast. Because, breastfeeding and looking after my 6-week-old just wasn't enough.
Not enough. That is not enough. because you have a child attached to your boob, that is not enough.
And you know what?
Yeah.
You wonder why people have mental health, like people, I say myself, have mental health issues because that's not normal. Like, you know, back in the day, they would sit, you know, let's talk about my, you know, where my dad's from even, sit in your hut, you're looking after a human and that is so highly respected, and that's it. No phone.
But you know what the difference is about that is that there isn't the technology, there isn't the social media, there isn't all of that pressure on you should be doing way more, and looking at it or even listening to it going, oh, I'm not doing that, oh, I'm not keeping up with that, oh, it's just crazy, isn't it?
And I think you hit the nail on the head there, like the social media piece. And you know, it's, I mean, I already have this such a big issue around comparison. Even as a child, it's like, oh, I had to have the things and I had to be at the party and I had to, you know, and so.
Totally. Yeah. I'm like that now. I've got a 12-year-old like that. Yeah. And I think my 6-year-old is becoming that as well, where I go, oh, I'm creating demons.
Yeah, right. But then like we didn't have the phone to compare. Now we just pick up the phone and we're like, are we enough? Oh, is this enough? Are we
constantly? You know, and you already have that in your head, that's a negative self-talk in your head anyway. Am I enough? And then this is making you question it even more. And I was listening to a great not a podcast but a live feed the other day on gut health and all that kind of thing, and talking about how we used to sit around as a family and eat all meals, whereas these days, and I'm guilty of myself, I don't eat breakfast sitting down. I eat breakfast standing up. I'm packing lunches. I'm making sure that the girls have their fresh food and, you know, everything like that. And even I'll do makeup if I'm finishing my breakfast and all that kind of thing. So they're talking about digestion and, you know, like good for your mental health as well, because your gut and your mind is connected. So if you're here stressing, trying to just shove some food in you rather than sitting down as a family, I just thought that was really interesting too. But let's move forward to the actual, how did you know, what strategies did you implement, and how did you know you were starting to feel better from this?
Yeah, so I think it was a time piece as well for me. So obviously as soon as I fell pregnant, I got in the haze, and the haze just kind of kicked on for probably for most of the first year for both children. I think for me, it was as my little one got a bit older, and it wasn't just so newborn-esque. And, you know, at 7 months for both children, I took them to sleep school. And so probably when the sleep got under control as well, I think, I mean, isn't that such a big thing when you're not sleeping?
Yeah, it's everything. Like, oh yeah, no sleeping sent me like cray.
Oh, absolutely. So I think that when the sleep was under control, you start kind of being able to get into a little bit more of a routine. It's less ad hoc. And again, I'm that structured person that this whole, I don't know when the baby's going to wake, I don't know when I can go to the toilet, I don't know, like all this, you know, anxiety around
having That's so interesting, because I think I was the same.
Really, just not knowing,
not being in control.
You go to bed and you're like, am I going to be sleeping for 15 minutes? Am I going to sleep for an hour? I need to know. Can someone just tell me, please? Like, you know. So I
always joke and say, look, if it was guaranteed that if I had a third and that they slept, no problem. Okay. You know, the raising stuff, yes, it's hard, but it's the sleep, the not knowing, am I going to get woken up in the ins and outs, and what, you know, what we went through with that. Yeah. So once the sleep started getting under control, you started to be able to think more clearly, get out of that fog.
Absolutely. And a big piece for me, and really a self-care piece for me, is socializing. I love to go for a dinner with my girlfriends, or, you know, with, you know, Jules and other couples. So as soon as the sleep was under control, we were able to get a babysitter to come in, because guess what? The little one slept. So babysitter just sat downstairs, watched Netflix. We were able to go out for a meal with other people. I was able to sort of start feeling like my pre-baby self in a way. And from a mental health perspective, that really supported me. And also being able to get back into my exercise and things like that. So I guess my hot tips would really be, think about those things that you used to love to do before you had bubs, and really try to carve out or at least prioritize that. I know it's not easy because we're time poor and things like that, but as much as possible, I think that's really what saved me.
Definitely. And I want to put a point in there that, and not feel shame or guilt around that's okay to want to do things for you. Like, you had a baby, and yes, I'm sure you care for them as best as you possibly can, but then caring for them means that caring for you first. And if going out with your girlfriends, once a couple of weeks, or going on date nights, like we have a deal, forever dating, like when we get 80 and whatever, forever dating, so organized date nights, organized mums nights out, and all that kind of thing. Mum's Gone Wild, I think that's a great title for it. Or even just going to the gym and exercising and stuff, and prioritizing eating well and all that kind of thing. That's okay. You're allowed to have that side of you as well.
Yes. And I think one thing that I struggled with was because I was working from home, I had a level of flexibility, which I was very fortunate with my job. Obviously, my parents and my boss, so they were like, dude, you do you with the kid, and whatever you can do, work whatever hours you need. So I understand that was an absolute privilege. But what that did mean is I was just, working at odd hours. I had a nanny to support me, and I would feel guilty if I asked the nanny to stay on for one extra hour, which was like $20 or $25, so that I could go for a walk around the block or get to the gym. But it was okay for me to have her stay for the extra hour if I was working, so it comes down to that whole thing about prioritizing yourself. Like, why did I feel guilty for $20 to go and do something that was going to set me up for the rest of the day, and maybe even make me feel good tomorrow, even because I went for that run, or I did that thing that was just for me? Why do we feel guilty, but we don't feel guilty if it's, slaving away over our laptops trying to get done for work that's going to produce money? That money is the big one.
Yeah, it is. And I think we all have that, whether we're mums, dads, or adults or whatever, we have that conditioning right now. And I think we really need to bring that back, because at the end of the day, when you are, referenced when we're 80 years old, are we going to sit back and go, oh God, I'm so glad that I put 50 hours a week into work, and forgot about spending time for looking after myself, and forgot about making that connection time with my kids? And is that what we're going to be thinking about then? Or
Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing is, prevention is the best way to go, right? Because let me tell you, a therapist ain't cheap, and neither is, being in the hospital because of XYZ happened to you, or having to see naturopaths like every other day because your gut's destroyed, or, prevention, that $20 could have potentially, set me up in a much better way than me just ignoring myself. And then where do you end up,
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday. Like, I went to the gym, and then I went for the walk to pick up the kids from school. And, after you go to the gym and you feel on a high, and you've got these endorphins running, and your thoughts are going through your head. And I was thinking about how, you might miss that. You might be rushing through life, right? You're so busy, you're trying to work, you're trying to raise the kids. So you skip a meal here, you skip workouts here, and and all that kind of thing, instead of actually sitting back and going, okay, I'm going to take the time out for me to prioritize that workout. I'm going to take 2 hours out of the every 4 days or 5 days or whatever, to prep some really healthy meals for me and my family, so I don't skip meals, and I do prioritize the workouts, and I do take care of my health, because in the long run, I'm less likely to get run down. I'm less likely to get sick, and then I'm no good to anybody.
That's right.
But if I'm going around and skipping meals and going, everything else is so much more important, you end up getting sick, you end up getting run down, and you're no good. That's so right. It's really thinking about the long term, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Instead of in the day to day.
And you need to be reminded, and this is where, again, maybe, people listening to conversations like this, I know it certainly supports me, even just having this conversation now, I'm like, oh, yep, get back on track with that, because we do get so caught up in the whirlwind that is life, that you don't sit back and go, oh, Jesus, should I, or you just quickly make decisions around what's going to make you more productive today. Get those couple of emails out, that'll just be easier, because then tomorrow I won't have to worry about that. So I just won't go for the run today because of, those couple of emails emails, and
there's so much more important.
Yeah, you make the snap decisions. So I think what's great is just pulling yourself out of that, whether that's listening to a podcast, having a 1-minute meditation where you sit there and focus on your breathing and then reassess your decisions that you're making for that day. Because as you said, it's setting yourself up for success in the long term.
Yeah, so powerful. And I love how you use that word support. I'm really into like angel cards and and crystals and all that kind of thing. And every time I have a podcast, I pull out a card of what is the message that we need to get across today, and it was support.
Oh, no way. Oh my God, that gives me goosebumps. That's awesome.
Yeah. Wow. So our conversation here today, I think, is that us mamas, we need to make sure that we all support each other in this, and having these beautiful conversations about it's okay to have these feelings, and it's okay to look after yourself, and it's normal for anxiety, prenatal depression, postnatal depression. It's normal to feel overwhelmed and all that kind of thing. But if we all come from a place of support rather than judgment, I think that's the message today.
Oh, I love it. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Is there anything else that you would like to add before we leave it? We'll wrap it up.
I mean, firstly, thank you so much for having me on, and I love what you're doing and I love your message. So I'm wishing you all the best with this endeavor. As you mentioned, I do have a podcast myself, the Parenthood Podcast. So we explore sort of the what happens behind closed doors when it comes to parenthood, and people's experiences and challenges around that. So often I get couples on the show, so you get sort of both mum and dad's perspective on a certain topic, and so that's been really great. So if anyone wants to check us out, it's the Parenthood Podcast, and also every alternate episode, myself and my bestie Liv, who also has 2 toddlers, we will talk about a challenge that we're experiencing in our daily lives. So it's a good combination.
Awesome.
And chatting about their challenges, and then Liv and I a little bit more lighthearted talking about our challenges as Melbourne mums. So something to check out if you are interested in hearing more people's stories in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was even telling a mum the other week about how you have both mums and dads on there to get both perspectives, or both partners, and she loved that as well. So I really love what you're doing, and I think it's really important as well, because we do sort of forget about the dads as well, and the involvement in the partners and how they're receiving life. So you live on Instagram, it says, and you are the Parenthood Pod, isn't it?
Yeah, Parenthood Pod. And if anyone
at the Parenthood Pod.
Yes, at the Parenthood Pod. And if anyone out there has a really interesting story and, is a challenge they experienced as parents, please, reach out to us on Instagram. I'm always looking for, different awesome stories to bring to our community. So,
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much again.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Mama. You can find all the relevant links, including socials, in the description section of this podcast. If you want to find out more information about how I can help you build your best body after babies, then visit my website, www.thefitmummethod.com, for more info. Lastly, before you leave here today, if you've enjoyed listening, then please subscribe and share, so you can help me to reach out to those mamas that also need to listen too.